everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. This is going to be a great talk. I am going to introduce to you Oliver Young, who is from the Cambridge Center for International Research. And he reached out to me about the potential of providing talks to our high school. And I said, yes, I know we have a bunch of people who are interested. So I really want to thank him for doing that. And Dr. McClelland from Cambridge University agreed to do the first talk. And so I really want to thank him as well. That's awesome. And I'm going to let Oliver go ahead and take it from here and introduce himself and Dr. McClelland.
Yeah, thank you so much, Emily. It's so wonderful to see so many people show up and be interested in a talk on philosophy. So I'm just going to talk really briefly about myself and about CCIR, introduce Tom, and then hand it over to Tom to do the talk. So CCIR, what we do really is we have a variety of programs where we get students engaged in academic research, and we offer a variety of programs and also a bunch of public outreach programs where we really try to push these what we consider to be public intellectual events. And it's our great pleasure today to have with us Dr. Tom McClelland, who I actually got to know last year while I was studying at Cambridge. Dr. Tom McClelland is currently a lecturer in philosophy over at the University of Cambridge. His research ranges over topics in the philosophy of mind, psychology, metaphysics, aesthetics, and the philosophy of business. He also works on, he's currently working on a monograph that's forthcoming called What is Philosophy of Mind? And today he's going to talk to you guys a little bit about what philosophy is, what the value of philosophy is, and specifically what philosophy has to say about artificial intelligence. So, Tom.
Thanks very much. Thank you all for coming. I've been looking forward to this. As Oliver says, I'm going to be talking a bit about philosophy as a discipline. It's quite an odd discipline, and there's a lot of misconceptions around what philosophers do and so on. So I want to communicate to you what being a philosopher is like and what studying philosophy is like. But I'm going to zoom in on this specific topic of artificial intelligence and why philosophical questions around artificial intelligence really matter today and are only going to matter more in the coming years as technology changes around us at a rate that's just incomprehensible. So I'm just going to share my screen. Give me one moment. Ding. Okay. So there's three things I'd like to cover in this session. So I've got a little map of what we're going to do. The first thing I want to do is just ask this question. Forget about AI for a minute. I want to ask the question, what is philosophy? Now, philosophers ask all sorts of questions, and strangely, this is actually one of the questions that philosophers ask. There are some philosophers who study the question, what is philosophy? It's that weird a discipline. And then we're going to get into philosophy and AI. There's some interesting questions there. I'm going to be asking you what you think about some of the issues here. Now, one of the many misconceptions about philosophy that I want to challenge is the idea that philosophy is all about impractical stuff, kind of navel-gazing questions that don't really have much to do with real life. So to kind of frustrate that that assumption, I'm going to look at in the last third of this session at how philosophical questions about artificial intelligence can be put into practice. So these questions aren't just academic questions for people like me in universities to muse over. These are practical, urgent questions that make a big difference to the decisions that private citizens are making today, the decisions that governments are making today, and as we'll see, the decisions that business people are making today, as technology plays more and more of a role in business decisions. Okay, so first things first, what is philosophy? So one way to define any discipline is by its subject matter. So if I say, what is biology? You might say, well, it's the study of living things. And if I say, what is economics? It's the study of patterns of financial transactions or something. So what is philosophy the study of? What's its subject matter? Well, I think we could do worse than saying this. We can say philosophy is the study of ideas and concepts. So this is quite intangible. Like biology, you can point at the things that biologists are studying. Look, there's a frog or something. Ideas and concepts, that's much more abstract, that's much more nebulous. But that's what we're interested in as philosophers. Ideas like truth, justice, human rights, ideas like time, space, causation, all these tools we use for thinking about the world, but don't often reflect. Another way of defining philosophy is by its subject matter. So if you're looking at science, for example, one thing you could do is instead of thinking about its subject matter, you can flip over to thinking about its method. Okay. So subject matter is one thing, methods another thing. So if I'm describing science, I could say, well, science works by doing experiments, for example. But philosophers don't really do experiments. So what exactly is the method of philosophy? So to understand the method of philosophy, we could go right back to the early days of Western philosophy and look at the figure of Socrates, who lived 469 to 399 BC. Now, Socrates lived in ancient Athens and spent his time wandering around the city, having conversations with the young aristocrats of the time, right? These Athenian aristocrats. And what he did is challenge all of their beliefs and all of their assumptions. So all of these Athenians would have assumptions about right and wrong, about what makes a good city or a good state, assumptions about the gods, about the origins of the world, and so on. And Socrates would question all of them, right? So, you know, when little kids at about 3 or 4 years old, they learn the question why, and no matter what you answer, they can always come back with another why. That's Socrates. Okay, he was doing that to the ancient Athenians. But one of the clever things he did is whatever answers came back to him, he'd identify problems with them. He'd say, well, that can't be because there's a counterexample to that. Or he'd say, look, what you just said there contradicts something you said earlier. Now, one of the things Socrates really wanted to do is to refine the concepts that we use. So in everyday speech today and everyday speech in ancient Athens, you talk about something like justice, for example. You wouldn't necessarily think very hard about what that concept amounts to, what that means. So what Socrates tried to do is improve our concepts, make them work better, try and understand exactly how they work so we know what justice is, so we know how to achieve justice, for example. And the way he did that is by doing something which is absolutely integral to philosophy. It's making arguments. So the difference between an opinion and some genuine knowledge is that genuine knowledge is backed up by arguments, by reasons. So Socrates would never just accept an assumption and say, sounds all right to me. He'd say, okay, what's your argument for that? If you think justice involves, say, a democratic system of government like they had in ancient Athens, why do you think that? Don't take it for granted. Give me an argument for why you think that's true. Now, when you start scrutinizing your assumptions like this, things start to fall apart quite fast. Lots of things that you think you know, it turns out you don't know, right? And this led Socrates to famously say, the only thing I know is that I know nothing. Because once you start scrutinizing your beliefs, it turns out a lot of them don't stand up to scrutiny. In fact, Socrates never really wrote anything down. There are no books written by Socrates. He never wanted to write anything in a book because he thought you should only write something in a book if you really know it. And you can't really know it. Nothing stands up to scrutiny. So this, again, is one of the peculiar things about philosophy, right? If you go into a biology classroom or go into an economics classroom, you come out of that class knowing more than you did when you went in. You go into a philosophy classroom, the opposite happens, right? You go in thinking you know some stuff about ethics, about knowledge and so on, and then all your assumptions get questioned and you come out knowing less than when you went in. So Socrates really got the ball rolling on this slightly destructive way of thinking almost 2,500 years ago, and we're still doing that in philosophy classrooms today. Now, for Socrates, at least, there was a dangerous side to philosophy. So Socrates went around challenging assumptions about the gods, about government, and so on. And he got into a lot of trouble for doing it and was actually put on trial for the crime of corrupting the youth. So what does it mean to corrupt the youth? Well, it's pretty much what I'm doing now. It's talking about philosophy with young people. That was enough to get him in a lot of trouble. And in fact, he was sentenced to death. So this is a famous painting in which Socrates there is reaching for this chalice, which has a poison in it called hemlock. He's about to drink that and die. And the figure on the left there sitting down is another famous philosopher, Plato, who was a student of Socrates. There's a couple of very interesting things about this story. One is Socrates was given the opportunity to escape. He had friends in Athens, and they could have got him out of there after he was given the death penalty. But his philosophical principles meant that he didn't think that was a morally acceptable thing to do. So even though he could have escaped, he accepted the death penalty because his principles meant more to him than his life. The other thing you'll notice in this painting is that Socrates is pointing up to the stars here. Now, this is interesting. So Socrates had the belief that his soul was immortal, and he had several philosophical arguments for thinking that. It wasn't particularly based on a religious tradition that he'd inherited. It was his own reflections that led him to that conclusion. So he was confident that after drinking this hemlock and dying, he'd actually live on. So you'll notice here that Socrates doesn't really seem too distressed. And in fact, all of Socrates, his friends and followers, are far more upset about this than he is. So the reason I draw attention to this is it's a clear case where philosophy makes a big difference to life, right? This isn't something you casually do over a cup of coffee and have a chat and then forget about it as soon as you come back to real life. Socrates was making a difference to Athens, one that the Athenians didn't thank him for. He was saying things that inspired other people, all these other people in the painting here. It changed his attitudes towards the law, for example. If it wasn't for his philosophizing, he probably would have, dodged this death penalty. And it changed his beliefs about life and death, right? He believed in life after death because of his philosophical convictions, his arguments. So it makes a huge difference to how he lived his life. Okay, now, another way of pinning down exactly what philosophy is to divide it into different areas. So some of these will be more familiar to you than others. So here's the three main areas of philosophy. We call them ethics, metaphysics, and epistemology. Now, ethics, I imagine you've heard of, right? So ethics, as the name suggests, is studying what's good and what's bad, maybe on the level of politics, maybe on the level of private individuals. So questions like, is the death penalty ever morally justified? That's ethics. Do people have a right to privacy? That's ethics. Now, metaphysics is the study of the nature of reality. Okay, so that sounds really abstract, and it is. If I ask a question like this, I'm doing metaphysics. Why does the world exist rather than not exist? Was the world created by God? And what's the nature of that God, if so? Is time an illusion? Or one you may have heard before, if a tree falls down in a forest and there's no one there to hear it, does it still make a sound? Now, epistemology asks questions about the nature of knowledge. So, for example, do we really know that the world is round? All these flat earthers come along and suggest otherwise. How do you know the earth is round? Right? You've never been up into space and looked. Do you really know? What criteria do your beliefs have to satisfy in order to count as knowledge rather than just some random opinion that you have? Do we know that we're not living in a computer simulation like the Matrix? Is that something we really know? Do we know we're not dreaming right now? Do you know I'm even here? Do you know I'm real? Do you know I have a mind? Now, philosophy gets really interesting at the intersection of all these different areas. So take a really important philosophical question. Is it okay to eat meat? Okay, so that sounds like an ethics question. So an ethicist might say something like this. Is it wrong to eat things that have self-awareness? Okay, that's a good ethical question. But then over in metaphysics, we can ask this. What is self-awareness? And then over in epistemology, we can ask this. How do you know whether something has self-awareness? Okay, so in order to make that decision about whether to eat fish, for example, you have to do a bit of ethics, a bit of metaphysics, a bit of epistemology. And at that intersection is where things get really interesting. So another way to think about philosophy is how it relates to all the other disciplines, the disciplines you'll be more familiar with. So here's a cartoon I borrowed from someone who's actually a physicist and former rocket scientist and now full-time cartoonist, Randall Munro. He has this diagram which I love, which arranges all the different disciplines by their purity. So you've got really applied disciplines, which do with kind of concrete stuff in the real world, and then pure disciplines, which are more abstract and general. So you have a sociologist there on the left, and according to the psychologist, all the sociologist is doing is just applied psychology. Okay, so psychologists study the mind, and then the sociologists are just looking at how people with minds come together in societies. But the biologist said all the psychologist is doing is applied biology. Right? So biology is about life and processes and organisms, and psychologists are just looking at a particular subset of that, a particular corner of that, which is the bit to do with the mind. But then biology is just applied chemistry, right? It's the special types of chemical interaction that come together to form life. And chemistry is all just to do with physics, right? Elementary particles coming together and combining. And then maths is way over there on the right. Okay. Now you'll notice that philosophy isn't in this picture. So someone came along and edited the cartoon like this and has philosophy holding the whole lot up. So this is quite a grand view of philosophy, but there's definitely some truth in it. All these different disciplines you'll be familiar with are pursuing knowledge in their different ways. Philosophers ask questions like this: what is knowledge? Why should we use the method of science rather than some other method to achieve knowledge? What's the value of knowledge? How should our knowledge be put into practice? What are the ethical guidelines we should apply when searching for knowledge? So what I want to communicate here is that philosophy is kind of unavoidable. It's everywhere, whether you realize it or not. Whatever discipline you're most interested in, there are some philosophical ideas in the background that you might not have thought about. So you can kind of do philosophy of anything. So there's philosophy of science, ask questions about the scientific method and what's so special about it. Philosophy of mind's a specialism of mine. Philosophy of art, what is beauty? What's the value of art? Philosophy of language, how do words get their meaning? Now, one of the more narrow areas of philosophy is philosophy of artificial intelligence. So that's what we're going to take a look at now, and I'm going to ask you for your thoughts on some of these questions. So I was saying before about all these different ways of describing what exactly philosophy is. So now we can apply that to this specific area of philosophy and AI. So we know that philosophy is the study of ideas and concepts. Well, philosophy of AI is to do with the ideas and concepts that are in play when we think about artificial intelligence. For example, what does it mean for something to be intelligent? That's what we're going to look at in a moment. Now, what's the method that philosophers of AI use? Well, it's not about doing some science, it's not about designing robots, it's about questioning the assumptions we make when thinking about AI. Right? So when someone designs a clever piece of artificial intelligence, we assume that it genuinely has intelligence, right? The clue's right there in the name. Well, a philosopher can come along and question that assumption. They can say, like Socrates would, okay, why do you think it's intelligent? What are your criteria for saying that this piece of software is intelligent? And then you remember those three areas of philosophy I talked about: ethics, metaphysics, epistemology. There's a load of questions we can ask about AI within each of those areas. So how should we treat artificial intelligence? That's an ethical question. How do you know whether a robot is conscious? That's an epistemological question to do with how we know stuff. Can an AI be conscious? That's a metaphysical question about the nature of consciousness. Okay, there's a huge set of questions here. Let's zoom in on one which I think is particularly important. What is artificial intelligence? And one thing we can do is break it down into a couple of smaller questions. What does it mean for something to be artificial? That one shouldn't be too hard to answer. And then what is intelligence? That one's a bit trickier. And if we can combine our answers to those two questions, we should get an answer to the big question. So artificial shouldn't be too controversial. I think we can say something like this. Something is artificial if it's produced by human beings rather than occurring naturally. So artificial snow, it's not real snow, it's snow that's made artificially. Artificial meat, it's not real meat from an animal, it's fake meat. Artificial sweetener, it's not real sugar, it's artificial. Okay. So now we get to the trickier question, what is intelligence? And this is where I'm going to ask you what you think. So here's a few candidates. Does a baby have intelligence? Does a chimp have intelligence? This is my cat, Atticus. Does he have intelligence? A bumblebee? Does a bumblebee have intelligence? A Venus flytrap? What about the coronavirus? People talk about how ingenious this virus is. Is it intelligent? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 5 minutes to think about these 6 examples. For each of them, ask yourself, is it intelligent? Yes or no? And think about the criteria you're using when you answer that question. And after 5 minutes, I'll come back to you and ask for volunteers to to give their answers and to state their reasons. Okay. I'm going to put a list of the candidates in the chat there for you, so you can see. Okay, hopefully you've had long enough there. What I'm going to do first is I see some people have helpfully put their answers in the chat here. So I'm going to go to Dilyana first. I wonder if you could explain your thinking behind your answer. So Dilyana said all 6 have some kind of intelligence. So what do you mean by that, Dilyana?
Sorry, did you address me?
Go for it.
Yeah. Well, I'll be honest. I made a quick Google search. What is intelligence according to psychology? Because I'm a biologist. So, and what Google said, and what I could add is that intelligence is the ability to solve day-to-day situations, to adapt, and to learn. Basically, to be a problem solver. And then here the intelligence varies into what kind of person you are, I guess. Could be analytical intelligence or various. Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah. Thank you very much for that. So I think one thing that's really interesting about that is you used the Google algorithms, which are basically AI, to answer your question about AI, right? It just goes to show how integrated into it is. So let's try and adopt the mindset of Socrates. So if you're one of the aristocrats of ancient Athens, you just believe whatever anyone else believes. Right? Everyone there thought the same thing. And then Socrates comes along and challenges our assumptions. Right? So if Google kind of tells us what our shared assumptions are about intelligence, but what I want to ask is whether those assumptions are correct, right? Whether they stand up to scrutiny. So I'll ask anyone else, do you think that definition from Google sounds about right? Is intelligence the ability to solve problems in the world? Or do you think intelligence is something else? Anyone feel free to stick your hand up or to start speaking.
So first, can you hear me?
Yeah, I've got you.
Okay. In my opinion, that is not the correct definition. My definition of intelligence is the ability to make a conscious choice of what action you are taking. And so if you just are able to deal with the day-to-day problem, because that's how you are built, and you just leave it all to pilot, then you're not intelligent. You're just doing exactly what you are made to do, like some sort of machine in a way. For example, with the 6 objects that you gave us earlier, in my opinion, the virus, the plant, and the bee are not intelligent, since they do not make any choice whatsoever. They just react on basic inputs that receive from the surroundings. The plant, whether there's something touching its sensors in the center of the leaf. The virus, whether it's found needed cells so that it can replicate itself. And the bee, whether it has found an intruder or whether it has found a plant to extract nectar from it. While the cat, the chimp, and the baby are intelligent, since even though they are quite frankly stupid, they do make decisions what to do.
You're calling my cat stupid?
Well, in general,
to be fair, he is incredibly stupid. That's why I chose him. I've got 2 cats, one of which is much more intelligent, and I deliberately chose the stupid one. But yes, yeah. So excellent answer, right? So we've got very different way of thinking about intelligence. Okay. So even working out these different ways of framing the concept of intelligence took a lot of work. We've got competing answers already just in a few minutes. And then the really difficult thing is to work out which answer is correct, right? So you've got your opinion. We heard that Jana got a different opinion off Google, and I'm sure there's a dozen other opinions around. Philosophers don't just exchange their opinions. We then have to do the really difficult thing of working out who's right, arguing about it. That's when things get really tricky. Okay, great. So is there anyone who thinks that the Venus flytrap is intelligent? No? Well, fair enough, fair enough. Interestingly, there's some recent work arguing that it kind of is. Okay, so admittedly, this is very counterintuitive, but the problem is this. Often we say that animals are intelligent, but then it looks like the criteria we use to say that are criteria that the Venus flytrap can meet. So we kind of force ourselves into this position of either having to say that the animal and the flytrap are conscious, or having to say, sorry, are intelligent, or having to say that neither of them is intelligent. So that's often what happens in philosophy. We discover that there's kind of these package deals where you have to say one set of things, some of which you really don't want to say, or another set of things, and you can't get the best of both worlds and protect the intuitions you had when you started out the discussion. Okay, is there anyone who thinks that my cat is intelligent?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank goodness, I was worried by the silence there. I was about to take offense.
Yes.
Yeah, so I really like the point highlighted earlier about decision making. So that seems like it's got something to do with intelligence. Yeah. Does anyone else have any other reasons for thinking that the cat qualifies as being intelligent? Elena.
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the signs or criteria for intelligence is the ability to make decisions and to learn from past behavior, make choices based on past behavior. And the cats, even my cat and your cat, fit in that category. They do know where they're allowed to go or where it is dangerous to go, so they avoid going there. They do make a decision when they, a typical example from a person with a cat, when you have a stranger come to your house, the cat chooses the highest place in the house to look on top, to be in charge, to be able to collect information but not be endangered by it. And this is a choice that the cat makes based on its past behavior.
Excellent, excellent. I really like that idea. So, sorry, go on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wrote in the beginning that why did not I select the fly trap and the coronavirus as having intelligence is because they don't have the learning mechanism. Learning, meeting obstacles or meeting whatever, and the reinforced learning, making decisions whether right or wrong, and then going back to the first position, and when meeting with a same or a different obstacle to alter its behavior.
Excellent.
I
really like
made it
that.
understandable. Yeah.
Yeah,
Can
absolutely.
I ask about that?
Yeah.
Can
Go
I
ahead.
ask a question about that? How do we know it's just not that cats who tend to jump to high places have had more offspring, and therefore evolution has rewarded cats who jump to high places instead of intelligence?
Your castrated cat would probably not do that. They have different forcing mechanisms. Do you hear me? If your cat is castrated, that alters her or his behavior, because the testosterone or the hormones in the cat's blood dictate a different behavior. Basically, the learning in cats starts after the castration.
Yeah,
of course,
that's
otherwise the
first
force of nature
lesson.
is a little bit stronger.
Yeah.
I say I'm Nevena Georgieva. About particularly the cats, they of course are intelligent, and one of the indicators for this intelligence for me is the fact that they're quite manipulative creatures. They not only solve problems and everyday type of problems, but rather they have mechanisms of acquiring what they want, and having wishes, of course, is something very specific for the complex type of animals.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that. So we've covered so many different ideas here already. So we've got the idea of solving problems, making decisions, and learning. Okay. Now, one thing that's come out in the discussion is those things overlap in really subtle and complicated ways, right? So that's really going to make things complicated. And then we have these questions like, okay, let's say it is learning, that's the criterion. How do you know whether something's behavior is learned behavior or instinctive behavior? And then you've got a whole other slew of questions. So I know other people have got other things to say, but there's a few other things I'd like to cover. So let's move on, and we'll get some more discussion points in a moment. But thanks very much for all your thoughts. That was excellent. Okay, so we've captured a lot of the philosophical issues around this question: what is intelligence? Now here's something that kind of unifies the different answers we've heard. Intelligence has got something to do with reasoning. Okay, decision making, problem solving, learning. It's all got something to do with reasoning, right? So often people studying AI talk about maths problems, right? If you can solve maths problems, that's a kind of intelligence. Language problems, can you understand complex sentences? Logic problems. So in the early days of AI, that's what they focused on, like creating machines that could do these things. And now machines that do these things are in most people's pockets right now. So we've looked at what it means to be artificial. That bit's not too hard. We've looked at what it means to be intelligent. Turns out that is a real can of worms. That's very difficult. Let's see what happens if we combine them. Right? So it looks like artificial intelligence is something made by humans. That's the artificial bit. That has the capacity to reason. Okay. So admittedly, the capacity to reason bit is a bit vague there. We need to pin it down in light of all those discussions we just had. But this looks like a pretty good starting point, at least. So then we can ask ourselves this. There are lots of things in the world right now that are labeled as AI. There are bits of software, robots, and so on. People talk about artificial intelligence as if it's with us, right? But we can do that Socrates thing of questioning that assumption, okay? We label these things as artificial intelligence, but do they actually qualify? Do they really meet the criteria that they need to meet? So let's go right back to another philosophical figure. This is Rene Descartes, sometimes known as the father of modern philosophy. So in Western philosophy, he's a big deal. So he was a philosopher working in France, and he's had a huge influence on philosophical discussion ever since. Now, Descartes had a lot to say about the nature of the mind and the nature of intelligence. And he said a machine could never be intelligent, right? Now, if he's writing in the early 17th century, he's not thinking the machines we're thinking of, right? He's never seen a computer, but he's still confident from his position that no machine, no matter how technology advances, no machine could ever think. Because he says something that's just made out of matter, whether it's nuts and bolts or whether it's silicon chips, something that's just made out of physical stuff could never be capable of intelligent activity. And he thinks that the reason that you and I are capable of intelligent activity is because we aren't just made out of matter, right? We aren't just a physical body made out of cells, which are in turn made out of molecules and atoms. We actually have a soul, an immaterial mind, something that's distinct from the physical world, and that's the bit of us that reasons, that thinks, and so on. Now, when Descartes was making these arguments, there were kind of robots around, a very basic early kind of robot. So one of the things that Descartes focused on is language. So he thinks that the ability for language is the true mark of intelligence. And we use our souls, our immaterial minds, to understand language and to use language. Now, back in Descartes' day, there was a fashion for automata like this, these creepy little machines that would be able to use the little pen you can see in the hand there to draw incredibly complicated diagrams, or to write long lines of prose, or to solve maths problems and things. Now, Descartes said that that machine was incapable of language. All it could really do is just like repeat a few phrases if you turn the cogs right. But maybe that's a failure of imagination on Descartes' part, right? If if Descartes was confronted with an Amazon Alexa, right, he might have to eat his words, right? Because Alexa can have reasonably intelligent conversations, right? And other bits of software can have conversations that are incredibly hard to distinguish from a conversation with a real person. Now, Descartes also focused on reasoning, which we were talking about a moment ago. Now, it looks like one of these automata can't really reason about stuff. I mean, there were basic calculators in Descartes' day which could do a bit of maths, but maybe it'd be a stretch to say that they could reason. But then, if you jump forward a bit, think about the first human-beating chess computers, right? So this is IBM's computer Deep Blue that famously defeated Garry Kasparov at chess, okay? This is old news now, right? There are machines that can easily beat any chess master now. But back in the day, that was a big deal because loads of people, including some philosophers, said a machine will never be able to beat a human at chess. Other philosophers said, well, you're making assumptions there. The idea of a machine that can beat someone at chess is completely fine. Some people foresaw it back in the 19th century before we even had computers and robots. And one side was proven right when this computer came along and successfully defeated a chess grandmaster. So again, it looks like if Descartes were around today, he'd have to eat his words. Now, finally, Descartes focused on creativity. So he said one of the types of intelligent activity we perform are creative acts. So this automaton can draw a diagram of a cathedral or something. But the creativity of an architect who's designing a cathedral, that's completely different, and no machine could ever do that. Well, very recently, there's been progress in artificial creativity. So here's a painting, for example, that wasn't painted by a human, it was painted by an AI. This is painted by a program. So here's a little exercise for us. I'm going to give you a series of images, one of which of the pair will be painted by a human and one of which will be painted by an AI. And I want to hear which one you think is which, okay? So I'll ask you to use the reactions button. If you think that the one on the left is painted by an AI, use the wave. If you think the one on the right, do the thumbs up, okay? Okay, so here's two. Which one of these was painted by an AI?
Is that our left as we face the screen?
Yeah.
Our left as we face the screen, okay.
Yeah.
Wave on the left, okay.
Excellent. Okay, so those who've answered, we've got a mix of opinions there. So this kind of shows just how difficult it is, right? The one on the left is the AI. Okay. So let's go for another one, see if you do any better. Okay, these are quite alarming, by the way. Sorry if these ones give you nightmares. Wave for the left if you think that one's the AI. Thumbs up for the right if you think that one's AI. Okay, so I'm detecting a bit more agreement that it's the one on the right there, I think. So, and you'd be correct that that one was indeed painted by an AI. Third and finally, which one of these? So again, one AI, one human. Wave for the left, thumbs up for the right. Okay, so again, mixed opinions here. We haven't had a unanimous response to any of these. So the AI is on the left this time. Okay. So again, the idea of AI that can use language quite successfully is now a really familiar idea. Right? We've all used apps that can understand us and so on. But maybe we would have agreed with Descartes quite recently that, of course, the one thing AI will never do is display the kind of artistic creativity that a human can. And it looks like maybe we're going to have to eat our words as well. Right? So we have this bad track record of making predictions and saying, look, a machine could never do this, and then it does. Right? So maybe that says something more about the limits of our imagination rather than the limits of artificial intelligence. This raises all sorts of complicated questions. Right? The fact that we can't always tell which one of these is done by a human and which one's done by a computer doesn't necessarily mean that the computer has been creative. Right? It's done something that can fool you into thinking it's done a creative thing. But is that the same thing as it actually having creativity? Well, welcome to a new massive philosophical question. Wherever you turn here, there's another huge, almost unanswerable question. Okay. So we've been looking here about how the methods of philosophy can be used to explore questions around artificial intelligence. So hopefully you can already get a sense that these are quite concrete questions that do make a difference to how you think about the world. Right? These aren't just idle questions to ask in a seminar room and then to forget about. But you might worry that it's still not that practical. Right? None of the things we've been looking at makes any difference to what we actually do as private individuals or as businesses and so on. So what I want to do for the last 5-10 minutes of this session is to look at how the topics we've been exploring actually make a difference to our practical choices. So here's a good question. How much should we rely on AI? So businesses are using AI all the time. Some of them rely on it tons. So think about the stock market, for example. In the olden days, every bit of stock that was bought by somebody ringing somebody on a phone saying buy, buy, buy. Right? Now things are completely different. Right? The people on the stock market don't do that kind of thing. Instead, they use programs that do the buying for them. And the successful ones have clever programs that identify when the most fruitful time to buy and to sell stocks and shares would be. And the less successful ones have AI that's not quite as intelligent, that doesn't make the decisions as quickly or doesn't make the decisions as insightful. Okay. There's this clear reliance on AI. It happens all the time. Governments use it, businesses use it, private individuals use it. But should we? That's the question. So here's a useful notion, right? We always talk about artificial intelligence, but there's something else which is worth remembering, which is artificial stupidity. So as humans, sometimes we do things that are really intelligent, and sometimes we do things that are really stupid. Things can actually be the same for a computer. Sometimes it can intelligently defeat someone at chess. Sometimes it can make really dumb mistakes. Now, a particular type of mistake that people are worried about now is this one. As humans, we all have biases. Okay, it's one of the great problems in the world right now is that biases are all around us. Even the most well-meaning people have biases to do with gender, to do with race, to do with social class, and all sorts of other categories. And these biases do a great deal of damage. But what we've come to understand recently is that artificial systems can also display bias. right? You might hope that computers are like better than us at maths, so we can just kind of outsource doing maths to computers. So maybe computers are better at everything, and we can just outsource all this stuff to computers and they'll make better decisions than we do. But it's just not true because of this phenomenon known as algorithmic bias. So algorithms are like the rules of a computer program, and sometimes these rules are biased. So here's an example. Amazon used a hiring tool which processed all the job applications that came into them and then gave a score to those applications based on the information in the resume, in the CV. And then it emerged that this hiring tool was very biased against women. So if an application had the word woman in it, or it had the name of a women's only college in it, it would score lower. Okay, so these applications were penalized for being from women. Now, it's not like there was a robot who made a decision, or a robot who's just kind of a sexist robot or something. That's not how it works. It's to do with this program absorbing loads of information about past decisions to hire or to not hire someone, and then coming up with rules that reflect those past decisions. So the fact that humans making hiring decisions had some sexist biases then got reflected in the technology, the AI, so it was being sexist as well. Another one that was used is
just a question.
Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Didn't they have some kind of feedback? How does the recruitment pay? What was the payout for this recruitment decision?
Yeah, so the initial decisions were based on past hiring, right? So basically the computer is programmed with loads of information that says, look, this is a CV that got rejected, this is a CV that got accepted. And then through this process called machine learning, where this really complicated piece of software keeps on writing rules that try to fit the past decisions that have been made. And once it's got the rules that best fit those past decisions, it's now in a position to make new decisions. So a new CV comes in and the program can say, this has all the features that successful past applications had, and this has all the features that unsuccessful past applications had. Does that make sense?
Yes, but they should have also implemented something like this hire was doing very fine in our company. Not only successfully, we successfully hired him or her, but he was successful at the job too.
Yes, I don't know. So as far as I know, with this tool, it was based on the success rate in interview rather than the success rate afterwards. But of course, there are other. It depends on what you program it with, right? So there are definitely cases where it's not just based on that data; it's based on wider data. But then, of course, that wider data can itself be biased, right? So we all know that there are biases in the appraisals people get for how well they've done this year at work and so on, and that data can then lead to biased algorithms for the computers. So the other one I'll quickly cover is a piece of AI that banks used in the States to assess loan applications, and African Americans who applied got a lower score than Caucasian Americans. Okay, now this actually became a big legal case, and it was found that this was racial discrimination. So the bank had to change the algorithm, but it didn't solve the problem, because now what the AI did is it penalized people who were from neighborhoods that were predominantly African American. Okay, so race was no longer in the information that the AI got, but through this process I described, the AI had worked out, well, in the past, people from this neighborhood weren't offered loans and people from that neighborhood were. So the AI was still kind of encoding racism, even though race isn't mentioned in the data. Okay. This is a huge topic at the moment that people are looking into. Now, here's a really difficult one. What ethical principles should we program into AI? So think about self-driving cars. As human drivers, you can sometimes face an ethical dilemma. So, for example, I live out in the countryside and birds often run out into the road, pheasants, and I have to decide whether to brake hard and try and save the bird, but risk the person behind me running into me. Okay, so it's like a small ethical dilemma that I regularly face. But what should we tell a self-driving car to do in those scenarios? That's a really difficult question. Right? Ethics is a massive topic. There are no easy answers. And then if the car causes a death, whether an animal or a human, who's responsible for that? Can we hold the car responsible? That doesn't sound right. Can we hold the programmers responsible? So here's the final question for you to think about. Here's a scenario for a self-driving car, right? This is a bad situation where the car has three choices. It can either swerve and run over the dog. It can either keep going straight ahead and run over the three workmen, or it can swerve in the other direction and go down the hole. So let's stipulate that in each of these cases, there would unfortunately be fatalities, right? So either the dog's going to die, either the three workmen are going to die, or the driver's going to die. How should we program the self-driving car? What's the right thing to do? So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that. If anyone has any opinions, do stick up your hand. Who thinks we should run over the workmen in this situation? No, I didn't think so.
No.
What about the dog?
Not as well.
Yeah? Yeah, Ricky?
Yes,
Sorry, I couldn't see who was trying to speak then. Try again.
Go ahead, whoever it was, go ahead and speak.
Yeah, I'll be fast. I think the artificial intelligence shouldn't be programmed at all to go towards any life. Either it's better to go towards some self-destructive mechanism than towards the dog or towards the group of people. Because there is some percent you might survive this hole. I mean, depends how deep it is.
Yeah, exactly. So this is one of the difficult things that it's not. I tried to present the kind of artificial choice of kind of, you know, basically deciding who dies. But of course, it's to do with the odds, right? You might say that you have to balance that against the odds. Like if you run over those three people, they're definitely going to die. If you go down the hole, maybe it's a bit different. But one of the things that we might think about here is about whose responsibility it is, right? So the dog's just innocently on the pavement where it should be. The driver's sitting in their self-driving car as they should be. What are these three workmen doing in the middle of the road? Right? You might think that the self-driving car shouldn't harm or kill the innocent driver when they haven't made a mistake, or harm or kill the innocent dog when they haven't done anything wrong. Right? But try writing a program that captures a moral principle like that. I mean, how's a self-driving car going to be able to make that kind of assessment?
Wouldn't the car make the decision that is socially accepted in our society, basically utilitarian basis, which causes the lesser harm? And in this case, it would probably be, as we value it in our society, probably the dog, because it's valued that some lives should be prioritized. So we eat meat because we say that we should not prioritize an animal's life, and we should prioritize ours in order to survive. And then we wouldn't, on a like utilitarian basis, there are three harms. Like if it's maybe between the human and the dog, it's more complicated, but it wouldn't probably be the workers because there are more harm caused if you kill them. Something like this.
Brilliant. Yeah, and that's exactly what a lot of people argue. So I like the idea there that what we want is a self-driving car that reflects the values we have in society. But then we get to this really difficult problem. What are those values, right? We all disagree on this stuff. Sometimes we disagree quite fundamentally on this stuff. And also there are big regional differences. So do we have a self-driving car that drives one way in one state, for example, and then when you cross the state boundary where there's a slight shift of values, suddenly the dog doesn't get run over? I mean, how on earth do we actually implement that idea?
That's exactly where I was going with the conversation too. You know, someone else's beliefs may be different than mine. I want to program my car to run over the people, not the dog, for example.
Yeah.
And like, maybe
May I add something? Observation from current semi-self-driving cars. They automatically slow down before zebra crossing. As we see the three, can you hear me? The three people are standing, the workers are standing on a zebra crossing. So the car, the current self-driving car would already stop by itself. They are already programmed to slow down. Also, the self-driving cars right now will stop even if you haven't crossed yet. And I have seen that from personal experience. I was walking on a sidewalk in a place with many Teslas, let's say, and I was surprised how they were slowing, even I had not reached the zebra crossing. And this is automatic behavior.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, so I think that's a clear case where it looks like actually a self-driving car is going to be more cautious than a human driver, which is one of the good things. But what the programmers of self-driving cars have recognized is there will always be some situations where you just have to make a difficult choice. It doesn't matter how quickly you react. So just like I've sometimes faced that choice where an animal runs out in the road and I've got to do one of two dangerous things, right? Slam on the brakes or run over the animal. The self-driving car faces that just as much as I do. So what they have actually had to confront these ethical quandaries and make decisions about how to program them. But then going back to the previous point, we then get to that difficult thing, right? We don't all agree on what the right thing to do is, right? So should I be able to program my car to respect animal life as much as human life, and you program your car to respect human life more than animal life? I mean, these are big ethical questions that we aren't really discussing collectively. So in the world of AI and philosophy, people are worrying about this, but it hasn't become that much of a big shared discussion yet. So I think it should be. This is a bit of philosophy we should all be doing collectively. Okay, and I know we could talk about this all day because it's such a big topic, but I'm aware we haven't got long left, and I wanted to give people a chance to ask any general questions they might have had about today's session.
I think Peter Doinov. Peter, do you want to go ahead? He's had his hand up.
Oh no, I just forgot to put it down. I was thinking of running over the dog earlier. I'm sorry.
Okay. Other questions?
Actually, I wanted to ask something. So as we have different kinds of AI, right? We have narrow intelligence and general intelligent AI and all those things. How is it that narrow AI is still considered an AI when it does not do reasoning by our definition? Because it's programmed to do one skill at a time. This is not exactly reasoning. So yeah, that's what I want to ask.
Yeah, that's a really brilliant question. So would you call like a calculator an AI because it can do maths? It's kind of tempting to say no, because that's not reasoning. It can just do that one thing really well. But then all the more sophisticated AI that we have, like the self-driving car, it's kind of just got lots of those things. It's got a bunch of specialist programs that are all hooked together to create something that can do something really complicated like driving. But here's one thing. Some people think that that's all humans have, right? Some people think that we've got all these different areas of our brain, each of which specialize in different tasks. And your intelligence is just the sum of your maths module and your language module and your attention module and your vision module all hooking up in the right ways to perform complicated tasks. So by that standard, there is no real difference between you and the self-driving car. But I'm not saying that's the right thing to take, but it is a possible response to the worry you raised.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Anyone else? Okay, there was one last question I was thinking of asking. So if no one's got any other pressing questions, I'll ask you that now. Do we have a duty to treat robots well? Okay, so this is a really difficult question. So it looks like the kind of robots we have around today probably don't meet the relevant criteria. Robots like this, they aren't that clever. Nobody really thinks that they're that intelligent. Nobody really thinks that they're conscious or that they can suffer or feel pain. But what criteria would a robot have to meet before we should start treating them that? Right? So here's an early kind of prototype of a laborer robot working in a store here, moving objects around. If we keep on using robots like this, at what point do they get clever enough we have to start worrying about their rights? What about the kind of sci-fi scenarios like Commander Data from Star Trek? Right? This kind of seems, really wacky when people were first talking about robots in science fiction well over 100 years ago now. But as AI's got more and more clever, we don't want to make Descartes' mistake of saying, oh, it could never happen. Right? Why couldn't it happen? Why couldn't we have commanded data? I mean, I probably won't live to see the 22nd century, but some of you will. Right? And in the 22nd century, is it really that implausible that we could have made enough progress to have a commander data type AI? And if we did, should we give them rights? Should they have the vote? Right? That's a really difficult ethical question. So I wonder what people think about that. What criteria does a robot have to meet before we start giving it rights, before we start giving it moral consideration? Any thoughts? Peter?
So I believe we should start worrying about this when a robot does an action that is not, that seems irrationally logical. That in order to comprehend it, you actually have to think about abstract concepts such as what a human would do in such situation or emotion, when it's not doing exactly the task it was told in the most efficient way, but in a way it believes it will yield the best results.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you. There's a lot of ideas in there. So let me pick out one of them, the emotions claim. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So it seems quite plausible that emotions are really important to whether something deserves our moral consideration. But imagine this. Imagine I got a strange brain injury that meant I could still see and I could still think, but I didn't have any emotions anymore. I couldn't feel fear or love or hate or anything. All the emotions were gone. Would you say that means I no longer have rights? Sorry, I didn't hear your answer.
I said you're kind of dead. You're a corpse at this point who just exists.
Okay, yeah, you bit that bullet. Okay. Yeah. Any other opinions on this? Victoria? Sorry, I can't hear you, Victoria. I think you've unmuted, but it hasn't worked. Okay, let's switch over to Elena then.
I'm sorry to be speaking so much, but I also think that emotions, the defining criteria. Right now, we have a lot of machines whom we personalize and about which we care. For instance, our cars. Ask a typical husband how easy they part with their previous car. It takes months till they stop feeling sad and sorrow for their car. But the moment we find out that the robots we have at home do the household chores, for instance, have emotions, this is when we will start talking about treating robots well.
Brilliant, brilliant. Yeah, I think that's right. But then we kind of face that really difficult question. Let's say that we all agree that what really matters is emotion. We then have this knowledge question, this epistemological question. How do you know whether the robot actually has emotions or whether it just seems to have emotions, whether it's imitating emotions? So that gives us another really deep quandary. Navina, I see you've got your hand up.
Sorry, I believe personally that we're going to get attached and give ethical value to robots in the moment when we start using them as in an anthropomorphic type of machines, because we now have intelligent robots in factories. But they are just arms, or they have fingers, they have human in their on their outside. So I believe that is going to be very important for our perception of robots, and this will make us be attached to them.
Brilliant. Yeah. So I think this is a really big problem, right? So self-driving car doesn't have a face, right? We don't really engage with the self-driving car. that much, not unless we get very attached to it, right? So, but if something has a face, we really engage with it. So there's a case today where there's a robot you might have come across called Sophia the robot. I think it was actually designed in Sofia, right? It's not very clever, right? AI people will tell you this isn't a very sophisticated robot. But because of the prosthetics that Sophia is designed with, some people really emotionally engage with this robot, right? A self-driving car is 1,000 times cleverer than Sophia. But I think emotionally we're more disposed to say, oh no, you can't kick Sophia, whereas kicking a car is fine. Okay, so maybe that's a problem with how we assess things, right? Something we're going to have to be careful with as AI gets more and more sophisticated. Okay, I'd love to keep chatting, but I see that our time's up. So let me say thank you very much, and I'll stick around at the end now if anyone has any last questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. McClelland. And thank you everyone for participating. We really appreciate it. And thank you to Oliver for this opportunity as well.
Yeah, so before we wrap up, could I ask for two things? One is, could I get a screenshot with those people who are willing to turn on their cameras, and just for to get like a big old screenshot of maybe as many people as we can. Fantastic, that's great. Nice. It's actually, you guys have been amazing. I did not expect 75 or 100 more than 100 people actually, with people in the waiting room to join a public lecture talk on philosophy. I'm actually doing my PhD in philosophy, and it's really quite heartening to see public interest in philosophy. And for the most part, in my experience, people don't really even know what philosophy is, and it's just, I think, a wonderful thing to do a bit of public philosophy and have these kinds of events. So thank you everyone for attending, and Tom and I will stick around for a little longer to answer any questions, but thank you everyone.
Thank you, you've all been great. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I'm going to stick around a minute too to ask you a few questions, but I want to see if any of the students have questions first.
Sure.
Yeah, I have a quick question.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
I can't see you, but is it Etanas?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I can see you now. Yeah.
So I actually have two questions. First is on the philosophy part, and the second is on the CCIR part of things. So about philosophy, can you provide me with a, like, if someone is arguing the opposite case, that the car in your experiment should hit the workers, and this will be like a basic deontological argument, how can this be structured in terms of not leading to absurdity? Because I figure out that these kinds of thinking, it turns out that we can't blame anything for, I mean, if we constrain ourselves by a set of values, at the end, if we scrutinize things really hard, it seems that we can't actually do anything without getting blamed. So is there like a solution to this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think one of the important things with all these philosophical questions is sometimes you get these absurd results, right? And that's worrying, right? And as philosophers, that's when we know something's gone wrong, right? So this is often how philosophical discussions work. Somebody puts forward a theory, and somebody else comes along and says, "I'm afraid that looked good, but it has this absurd result, so something's gone wrong." Okay. So I think it depends on how you think about it. But what I'd argue with, say, that ethical dilemma is that you wouldn't be responsible for your choice there. because you can't be expected to make a balanced ethical decision in that time frame. Okay, so if I had all year to decide whether it's the dog or the workman or myself, then you can blame me if I make the wrong choice, right? In that nanosecond, I don't really think we can hold anyone responsible. They can make their best guess, but it's not their fault if they make a choice which we then disagree with.
Yeah. And then I quickly Googled your program. Do you accept international applications for the one-on-one research concept?
Absolutely. So
Absolutely.
I could say a little more about the program if you'd like, but so all our programs are international, and we have students really from all over the world. We have students from China, India, all the way to, I don't think we've had a student from Bulgaria yet, but yeah. But we from Canada, I think we currently have students from Dubai and just all over. Yeah.
Aska, you could be the first Bulgarian.
Yeah, we'll see. So I understand it's a all year round application process. I can apply whenever.
Yeah, so I could say a little bit about that because I didn't want this to be an information session for our programs. But the one-on-one program is available year round, and what we do is we try to find students who have specific intellectual passions, and it's a sort of one student, one mentor, one project kind of program. And so that, because it's so personalized and so flexible, that's available all year round. And depending on your schedule, you can sort of work that into your academic, overall academic program. So our other programs have set start dates. Tom's actually currently teaching a course on the philosophy of AI. There's an upcoming course that Tom is leading on the Future Entrepreneur Program, which is a really interesting program where Tom is working with a startup at Cambridge and sort of doing the philosophy of business within a sort of consultancy context. So bringing that philosophical perspective and engaging with businesses and using philosophical tools to help an actual startup called Food.ai.
Well, Oliver, I don't know the philosophy of AI course that's going to start soon. I don't know if the numbers are locked in for that yet. You might know better than me. I don't know if it's still possible to apply for. Officially, the deadline's passed, but I don't know if we're still accepting new applications for anyone who's interested.
Yeah, so we could definitely extend the deadline for the spring. Technically, that has just recently closed.
Yeah, just last week, I think. But I know we've already made an exception for somebody, so I wonder.
Yeah.
If anyone was interested in that, maybe it would be possible.
So we're fairly flexible, and if there's a strong application that comes in later than the deadline, we do consider that. But there's also upcoming courses in June, and they're really a wide range of courses. We don't just do philosophy, but there's things like the economics of COVID-19, international human rights law, all sorts of what I think are really cool courses. That's at least like when we're working with lecturers and trying to design these courses, that's one of the goals, is to sort of design these what we would consider to be cool courses, like the philosophy of AI and the philosophy of business and things like that.
Oliver, are there costs? I imagine there are.
Yeah. So there are. So these courses vary. The way it works is that we also have a fairly generous scholarship pool. So that's what enables students who, our scholarships are mostly based off of merit, and they run up to roughly upward, for the one-on-one program, upwards of like £1,500. but our programs range anywhere from 2,000 to around 5,000 pounds.
Okay. And therefore, and high school students can do them, or some of them?
Yeah, that's right. So the one-on-one courses are actually also available for undergraduates, but actually most of our courses are geared towards high school students.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's really good to know. I'll let students know.
Yeah. And I can share with you our spring prospectus for our various courses. Yeah. Yeah. And students could study with Tom. Tom has been working with us for quite a while. So.
Awesome. And I'm just wondering if we can get you guys back sometime. I don't know what your schedule is for these talks or what Tom's schedule is, but
yeah, I'd definitely be open to do round 2 sometime if you fancy it. Yeah, absolutely.
That's awesome. I was thinking either June or September, like end of school or beginning of school. Or if students have a different idea, you can voice it now. Let me know. But we are often looking for speakers of variety of kinds. And this would be great too.
Brilliant. Yeah,
I
absolutely.
mean, there was plenty of interest.
Yeah, I was impressed with the turnout. In fact, I texted my teammates and said maybe we need to upgrade the Zoom account for this. The 100-person cap. We've never encountered that situation.
You've never reached that.
Yeah.
Next time, let me know, because mine's, I think, 500. So we can also host it if necessary.
Yeah, but the students have been great. They were, and I think it was definitely a success.
Yeah, great. Ellie, you have a question?
Hi, yeah, can I ask my question? So hopefully I'll be a student at Cambridge next year. It all depends on me fulfilling my conditions, but I've applied for computer science, so I'm working with, that's my subject. And I was wondering what courses, like, I suppose there are interdisciplinary courses about, because AI is very intertwined, obviously, with computer science. And so I was wondering what courses there would be, like philosophy and computer science available. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, there's not actually as much overlap as you might think for that. So within computer science, I don't know for sure because I don't teach it, but I'm pretty certain I've spoken to students who've done courses on like the history of AI and things like that. In the philosophy department, we don't actually offer a philosophy of AI module, right? We offer various modules in which AI comes up, right? So there's a bit of an ethics paper which is to do with AI. There's a bit of a philosophy of mind paper that's to do with AI. What I don't know is whether they are papers that we share with computer science, right? So I don't know if you can take it as part of your degree. But what you can do, and what many students do, is sit in all the lectures anyway, right? And get involved even if it's not actually part of their degree. I mean, one great thing at Cambridge is we have a rolling program of like visiting speakers and events and stuff. And AI is a really big topic in Cambridge at the moment. We have this huge institute called the Leverhulme Centre for the Future of Intelligence, which is like this huge AI research thing. And they have like constant seminars, talks, lectures, and so on. So you can get involved in that, have great discussions, meet great people without it necessarily being part of your degree or something you get examined on at the end of the year.
So there's that freedom, optional.
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you.
And just to add to that, I'd encourage you to check out the reading groups, because that's, I think, where the best philosophy action happens at Cambridge.
Reading groups?
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
So in the reading groups, so at this centre I was talking about, for example, they have a thing where once a week they meet after having read a particular research article, and then we discuss it. So there's one reading group which is called the Kinds of Intelligence reading group, to do with thinking about artificial intelligence, animal intelligence, human intelligence, and the differences between them. And we agree on like what we'll read in advance. We read it and then we go and argue about it for an hour, and then and then get on with the rest about it.
Sounds fun. Okay, thank you.
It is.
Yanni, you have a question?
Yeah, the topic got me really interested. My last question would be, Mr. McClelland, what is your opinion for the foreseeable future of the artificial intelligence? What do you think
Yes. Thanks. That's a really good question. So one of the questions which I touched on sometimes, but tried not to focus on, is this one. Is there such a thing as artificial consciousness? Okay. So it's one thing to ask whether something has an intelligent mind. It's another thing to ask whether it has a conscious mind, by which I mean, is this thing experiencing the world? Is there something it's like on the inside for this thing? Or is it just kind of dark on the inside? And I think that's actually the more important question, morally, intellectually, and so on. And I'm quite skeptical about artificial consciousness, and in fact was in an online debate with somebody about that a couple of weeks ago, where he thought we're going to have artificial consciousness by the end of the century, and I was saying not so much. So.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great question, Yana. Any other questions?
I have a fairly quick one.
Okay.
About the autopilots, like the car problem with the dog. Since I'm pretty sure there are already cars that have autopilot, what is it, like AI, like Teslas and stuff. Do we know how they would have solved this problem, like if they were in that situation?
Yeah, that's actually a really, really difficult situation. So another big problem with AI is that the programs have become so complicated that we don't understand them. And in fact, even the programmers don't understand them. Because the programmers don't literally kind of like write in rules of what to do in every situation. Instead, these programs evolve over time in incredibly sophisticated ways. But that means we can't really actually understand what's going on in these programs. So this has been a big debate at the moment about whether AI should be transparent, meaning should we only ever use self-driving cars that can kind of explain their decisions to us? Or is it okay to have a self-driving car where maybe it would make a choice to run somebody over and we can't even ask it why? We don't know why it did it. So that's the kind of complicated answer. The more direct answer is, I think they're generally programmed in favor of doing the least harm, and they're programmed in favor of humans over animals.
So they would have run over the dog.
I think it would have run over the dog, but I don't think it's the same for every car. The software varies.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Good question. Thank you.
Other questions? Are you all tapped out? Well, thank you. Thank you, Tom and Oliver, both very much. And I hope, Tom, we can bring you back sometime. And Oliver, I hope we can host other speakers.
Absolutely.
So let's stay in touch.
Yeah, we'll stay in touch, and I'll let you know about our programs. Actually, Emily, we'll be in touch about that too.
Okay, great. All right, thank you both. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.
Have a good evening, day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.